We love participants.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna wait a few minutes to let a few more people get into the room before we get started. Here comes another one. I think it's 12:01, so we'll give people a couple more minutes. I'm Karen Boss. Tami and I are going to have a conversation about 2 of her books, and then we're going to take questions at the end. So we're just waiting a few more minutes to let a few more people come in, and then we will get started. What do you think, Tami? Should we give it one more minute?
Yeah, 1 minute and then we can get going.
All right, sounds good.
Got a decent enough crowd.
You're just joining us. We're just letting people get settled in and join us, and then Tami and I will have a conversation, and then we'll take questions. We're just giving it another minute or so to let a few more people get into the room. And I'll just warn the people that are here that I am at a friend's back porch today because I have no power at my house, and a giant dog might come home in the middle of all this. So that'll be really exciting if that happens. Just letting folks know.
And I want to share my cup.
Oh, what's it say?
It says, I am a writer. Everything you say or do may end up in my novel.
That's fantastic. Fair warning to anybody you know.
Oh, fair warning.
There you go. I saw an agent on Twitter recently who said something about, or no, it was a librarian who was like, if you ever want to use my name in your book, feel free. I love that.
I love cool names. I'm always looking for cool
great.
Names too.
All right, here's a few more people. So just letting folks know that we are going to get started in just a second. I'm Karen Boss. I'm an editor at Charlesbridge, and Tami Charles is here. We're going to talk about 2 of her books. Then we're going to take questions too.
I think we're good.
I think we are too. All right, why don't you start off with just a quick introduction of yourself, Tami?
Sure. I'm Tami Charles, and I write books for kids, teens, young adults. Like Vanessa, was my very first published book. Very proud of it. I don't know if you can see it.
Yep, now we can. That's great.
It's with Charlesbridge, and Karen Boss is my editor for this. Very good experience. And the companion is called Becoming BEATRIZ. So these are my 2 Charlesbridge book babies.
And one of them, like Vanessa, we aged as a middle grade, and Becoming BEATRIZ, we aged as a YA book, even though they are companions. So that was an interesting part of working on these 2 books together. Yeah. So I'm Karen Boss. I'm an editor at Charlesbridge. I work on picture books and board books and everything up to fifth grade in YA. And I was really pleased to get to work with Tami on these two books. So we're just going to have a chat about a few things that we thought would be interesting to people, and then feel free to use the chat box, which you need to just hover at the bottom of your screen, and you should see a bunch of things should pop up, and one of them should be a little speech bubble that says chat. And if you click on that, you can type anything you want into the chat room, and then we will take questions. All right, so we're going to get started with me asking Tami a question. And so, Tami, I know that Like Vanessa was your first novel manuscript that you completed, like in full, and you sent it out on submission. And so I signed it up at Charles Bridge as a part of a 2-book deal, and we really weren't sure what the second book would be. So we started off with Like Vanessa, and I'm wondering if you can talk about why Like Vanessa was the first long-form story that you ever completed. Why do you think that this was the book?
So before I wrote Like Vanessa, I did have another manuscript. I want to say that manuscript is, by this point, is a good 12 years old. And I was trying to get an agent, get a book deal with this particular manuscript. But what I learned prior to writing Like Vanessa was, you know, the first long form novel that I wrote, it wasn't authentic to me and my lived experience. I think I was just trying to write something that I thought would get me published. And I don't think that, like, as writers, we need to write what's in our heart. It's cool to learn new things. Like, there's plenty of things I've written that I didn't know about. But I think what really got my foot in the door was writing Like Vanessa, writing a story that really kind of aligned with my teenage experience, you know, coming into becoming a teenager. So, and I remember I had dinner with an editor who, you know, I was trying to pique her interest in my work, and she starts asking me all these personal questions, you know, tell me about what life was like for you when you were a teenager. And when I brought up, I said, oh, when I was 13, you know, like, it was so crazy. I did this pageant. I don't even know what I was doing, but I just entered on a whim. And she kind of like stopped me, and she's like, wait, why aren't you writing about that? And that was such a light bulb moment for me, because I had already had this other novel that I thought would be my foot in the door, but it wasn't. And I was just like, oh, yeah, I should be writing about, you know, something that's authentic. So I took that and I ran with it. And that's how Like Vanessa was born. It's about a 13-year-old girl who sees the first Black woman win Miss America, and that kind of like, you know, sets her on this journey, like, wow, maybe I can do something like that. Maybe Black is beautiful, because prior to that moment, she had never seen anyone Black or anyone who looks like her actually win that pageant. So I had a different experience growing up. By the time I was 13 and this opportunity came along for me, it was a no-brainer. I was like, of course I could try out for something like this, because I knew that there were, you know, quite a few women who had done it before me, but my character didn't know that because she didn't see that. And representation is everything. So I really just poured in my own experience to create this novel. And I think that's what did it. Like, just really writing from a place of my heart and my experience growing up in Newark, going to school in Newark. I think that was the ticket for me.
I love how Newark is almost a character in Like Vanessa. It's so fancy.
It is a character. Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, it totally is. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, so it's my turn.
Yeah.
Question for you. So I will never forget the offer email for Like Vanessa. It is my favorite story, and I think that you should kind of tell the audience, like, tell the audience about when you got Like Vanessa in your inbox and what happened.
Yeah, sure. So Tami's agent, Lara Perkins at Andrea Brown, she sent the manuscript for Like Vanessa on a late afternoon. It was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it came in. And at the time, I was definitely acquiring books and getting my own submissions, but I was still assisting our editorial director, Yolanda Scott, and that's who Lara sent the manuscript to. And Yolanda skimmed the cover email that Lara included, and then she said, hey, Karen, this looks like it has a lot of potential. Why don't you read it? And I said, okay, great. And I actually read the cover email, and I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. I'm actually going to read it tonight, which I almost never do. I try not to spend too much of my personal time working, but I took the book home, the manuscript home, and I read it that night. And I went back in the next morning to work, and I said to Yolanda, we should acquire this book. We should be publishing this book. Holy cow, we need to publish this book. And very shortly, it actually was not a long time, I don't think, Tami. We made an offer pretty quickly. And so when I wrote the offer email, I wrote to Lara, and I always put some personal stuff in an offer email for sure, like why I've connected with a book or why I want to publish it, before I get down to the nitty-gritty of what the money is. But I actually, in this one, I told the whole story. Like I said, we got it, we got the book, and I took it home, and I read it overnight, and I carried it on my device with me to the kitchen when I needed a snack, and I brought it to the kitchen with me when I needed to make dinner, and I finished reading it at 10:35, and I had tears in my eyes, and this story is so special. And then I also made a comparison to neighborhood in Newark, where Vanessa lives, and how that seemed similar to one of the neighborhoods that I lived in Boston, which is the Latin Quarter of Boston, Hyde Square, which is in Jamaica Plain, and how the bodega on the corner where I often went to get empanadas was very much like the bodega that Beatriz's family runs in Lake Vanessa and also in Becoming Beatriz. And I just had such a personal connection to the story right off the bat that I wanted Lara and Tami to know that. And in particular, I wanted Tami to know it because Tami is a Black writer writing about a Black young woman, and I am white. And I wanted Tami to know that there were ways beyond race that I was connecting with her story. And I wanted that to be clear from the very beginning. And so I put that into the offer. And apparently it mattered because Tami still talks about the offer email this long later. And I think it helped because shortly after that, Tami, we had a phone call because I was not the only person who was interested in this book, and you wanted to talk to potential editors who you would work with and knew nothing about. And so we had a phone call so that we could talk a little bit about the story and about who I was, and we could get to know each other. And I think that was fantastic to get to know you that way before we started working together too.
Yeah, my favorite part of that email was like you told me what you had for dinner.
Right, I can't remember what it was.
You had a salad that had black beans in it.
That's what it was, yes.
The black beans. Once you put the black beans, I was like, Karen is my people.
That's awesome. That's so great.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, these are the kind of joys I think that can happen between editors and writers, you know. So let me ask you, so I remember that you weren't sure what the second book was going to be that we were going to do together. And how did you finally come to land on that you thought that like Vanessa and Becoming Beatriz should be companion titles? How did that come to be?
So when I finished writing Like Vanessa, I kind of felt bad for how I did Beatriz as a character. I felt like, man, like, okay, she was this bully, you know, throughout the novel, and dang, I really don't want to leave her like that. And coming from a teaching background, I taught for 14 years, so I know what bullies are like. I've taught the bullies. But one thing as a teacher that I'll always remember is that, you know, bullies aren't born that way. There's a reason, there's layers to it, and there's always a chance to become better. So honestly, I was afraid to pitch the idea to you because writers, we always hear publishers do not want a sequel, don't even try it, you know. So we had to like be very careful about like, we don't want to call it a sequel. We just kind of want to pair this with Vanessa, pulling a character from like Vanessa and giving, you know, breathing new life into that character. So I had a lot of fun exploring, you know, all the ways that I could layer BEATRIZ and really provide explanation for why she was that way and like Vanessa, but show how she evolves, you know, a year later from where like Vanessa ends. So I'm just really happy that you were willing to take the chance, because I'm telling you, if you didn't, I don't know what I would have done.
You had no other ideas. You were deployed. That's funny. So I will say that when you first pitched it, it was just the pitch. It was like, hey, I'm going to write this story from the perspective of Beatriz, and it's going to pick up after Vanessa leaves off, and it's going to be about her. And Charles Bridge was fine with that. I thought it was a great idea, and the folks above me were signed off very quickly. But I think what is so unique about that book is that you accomplished two things. It is a sequel in many ways because it carries on from where Vanessa leaves off in the timeline, right? So it carries right on into the next school year. But at the same time, your whole point of the book, as you say, is to give us the background of how did Beatriz get like this. And so you had to write this book very differently, right? So in Like Vanessa, we get a very linear story that's just right along a timeline with intermixed poems. And then of course we know that something has happened in Vanessa's background that she's not thrilled about, and she's trying to figure out how to reconnect. But in Beatriz, you really had to figure out, how am I supposed to explain to the reader what Beatriz has been through without like just enormous info dumps into the middle of chapters where Beatriz like sits in the sunshine and thinks about her life, you know, like, which doesn't work, right?
No, it does not work that way. I had to do this. Becoming Beatriz has quite a few flashbacks, and you have to be careful with those, you know, because you don't want to jolt the reader. So that was really interesting, playing with all of these different, is mediums the right word? Because
there's newspaper articles.
Yeah, there's everything. Like I really, man, I threw a lot into the pot for that companion. But, you know, I had a really good time going back that far back. So
yeah. And we really got a great glimpse into who Beatriz is and how she became that person.
Yes, and piggybacking off of that, so I have a question for you. You know, an author has to put a lot of trust in her editor, no matter what. And it's even more trust when the author and editor don't share a culture. Like we don't share a culture. So how did you approach editing these books and working with me when you aren't Black or Latinx?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it's always a question of how am I approaching a book, working with the author and whose work it is, right? So there's that first, like forget culture, forget race, forget anything. This is the author's work, and I am there to help it become the best work it can be, but it's not my project. It's not my book. These characters are not my characters. So there's already this really important consideration, I think, that an editor needs to take. And then when the person, the writer of the book, is not of the same culture as me, that needs to be something that I'm very aware of. And I think it's interesting because I think some white people approach that kind of thing by saying, well, it's just about the people. The culture doesn't need to matter. Like, we don't need to see it because it's not relevant to working together. And I think that that's wrong. I think that it's the same as saying, I don't see race. Like, you have to see it everywhere, right? So my awareness that you are writing a Black character and you yourself identify as Black, and then you're writing a Latina character and you yourself identify Latina, plus you're writing a whole storyline in Beatriz that involves the Haitian culture of which you are a part through marriage. And so there's a lot of layers there, right?
I'm Haitian by relation.
You are, right. And I am none of those things, right? So the first way I always approach it is that the author always knows more than I know about anything. So if I say to an author, hey, I have a question, is this the way that this should be? Because I've heard it these other ways or whatever. But I often will write in comments, like, I might be editing while white here, so you need to let me know if that's what's going on. And I've had a few people say, like, thank you for acknowledging that, and you are actually kind of right. We should shift this. Or, yeah, you're totally wrong. You're too white. You don't get it. We need to.
Oh, no.
And I think that for me, it's like putting it on the table is the way to be most successful, right? Because I think what that lets folks know is I have no agenda. I'm not here to impose anything on anyone. I'm here to, and I'm also not here for you to teach me either. I'm here for us to work together to figure out whether something needs to be shifted. And if you tell me culturally, no, it needs to stick, then I'm done. The conversation's over. Like, that's the way that it is going to be. And so that's usually how I approach it. And in these two books in particular, I think we had a really good time with that, like asking each other questions, like, do you think that this should be this? Or you saying, I went back to my mother-in-law and I double checked on this thing in Haitian culture and it turns out it should be this way instead. And I'm like, great, if your mother-in-law says so, then that's the way it's going to be. Yeah. So I think there's lots of, and also you and many authors, even if it's your culture, you don't just use, because you're one person and you're one person's experience. So you took both of these books and you took them to other people and said, please read these and tell me what I've gotten right or wrong, right? And you asked for other folks' opinion, and then you and I took all those people's opinion into account too.
Big time. So writing, I want to say that writing Becoming Beatriz was harder for me than like Vanessa, because in Becoming Beatriz, yes, I introduced this third cultural layer with the love interest. He's Haitian, so there's, but her brother was actually murdered by a Haitian gang. So there's all these like conflicts and layers, and man, like I will say that even as an author of color, we have to still turn to other people because we're not a monolith. We don't all, just because, someone is Black, that doesn't mean that all Black people have the same, lived experience. All Puerto Rican people same, Haitian people same. It's just not. Like, everybody's experience is different. And I really try to take that approach where I know I'm not going to get everything right. But just because I have a character who may do something that is not typical of a Black person or a Puerto Rican person or a Haitian person, like, don't discredit that because we're not a monolith. So I really had a good time. I reached out to, when I tell you I had my whole, like, a group of family and friends, I think I rounded up like 7 women in my family and friends group. And it was just like, hey guys, I need help with this. Can you check my Spanish? Can you check my Creole? Can you check all of the little layers that perhaps I'm missing? And they were more than happy to help me. I paid them with food. I mean, they're family, why not, right? But I really have to give a lot of credit to a fellow author, Sofia Quintero. She is a Puerto Rican and Dominican YA author. She helped me so much with Becoming Beatriz because I had to like, again, so many layers. So yeah, we're just not a monolith, and there's always a way to make sure that you're doing it right. And I have to give you a lot of credit, Karen, because you forgot to mention this to the audience listening. Karen was so invested in the story. Beatriz is actually part of a gang. And there's this one storyline where I had it written in that Beatriz actually carries a small razor on the inside of her cheek. So we were going back and forth about that. And the only reason why I put that in there is because this was true of that was an actual lived experience. My mom is a former principal from Newark, and she actually had a couple of students who would hide the razor in their cheek. And it sounds like, no way, there's, incredible, no way anyone would do that. Well, my editor,
me,
my editor questioned me on this, and then she goes, okay, well, let me try it. Well, Karen spent the whole day with a piece of sea glass in her cheek just to see if she could function and talk, and no one knew that she had that in her cheek. Why? Because that's how it was done. You can't really tell. So kudos to you for going the extra mile.
You know, I was sitting at my desk. I'll never forget. I was sitting at my desk, and you and I had been around and around about it. And I have a lot of sea glass, like in a jar on my desk at work, because I go into Maine in the summers. And I was like, you know what then? Okay. So I went through the jar and I found a big square piece, like, you know, the side of, and of course there's no razor on it. So there is still that, but I just stuck it in there, and I went to meetings like that. And, and then at the end of the day, I emailed you and I was like, all right, fine. I give up. Nobody knew I had sea glass in my mouth. Yeah.
That was a real lived experience that my mom would catch a couple of her students, and they definitely had that.
That's amazing.
It's unfortunate, but
yeah,
you know, it is what it is. So
the other thing I loved about these books is there's so many songs mentioned in your books, and you had to figure out songs that came out during that time. Like you couldn't mention songs that came out after the date of where you were in time. And so I checked every single one of those to make sure that they were right. And that led to me listening to a lot of old school 1980s hip hop while I was editing, which was so fantastic, because I'm like, Grandmaster Flash is playing in my office, and people would come by to be like, what the heck is going on here? Yeah, and I'm like, I'm editing to Grandmaster Flash today, and it was just fantastic. So yeah, so thank you for that.
Good times.
Yes, so great. So I want to ask you, and I think this is on a lot of people's minds, is how are you doing with writing during the pandemic?
So what month is this?
This is August now. Can you believe it?
But like, how many months has it been?
It's been 5 months.
5 months. Okay. So real talk, the first 2 months of this pandemic, I could not write. It was very, very hard for me, because what I noticed was, we started with this one pandemic of COVID, and that was scary by itself. I lost a couple family members to it during this time, so there was that. But in the midst of that, a second pandemic emerged of, this increased incidences of injustices against people of color, against Black people. And it just broke my heart. So I had these two problems just kind of like weighing so heavy on me. So for the first 2 months of the pandemic, I was not successful writing at all. And I really questioned if I would ever be able to like get myself back into a groove. Because on top of that, I'm a parent. My son is 10 years old now, and man, he sees a lot of stuff. Like, I can't control everything that he sees. So he had questions. Mom, who is George Floyd? Why do I keep seeing this? And so I was dealing with all of that for the first couple months. I think by about May, I started to piece myself together. Something just kind of clicked for me. I think what really did it was Instagram started having these weekly verses contest, like a contest, I guess, where they would have two artists and they would kind of battle it out. And it was just like fun to watch and a real throwback to times that made me happy. So I did see one of those Instagram battles, and that kind of like shifted it all for me. And I was like, I got to get my life together. I have a kid. He's looking at me and how I'm handling it. I need to be that model for him to let him know, hey, we're going to get through this and everything is going to be okay. So from there, so I think May forward, I've been doing mostly poetry though. Nothing like set, but I do have a notebook full of poems. So, hey, it's a start.
That's fantastic. Good. And I think, I think a lot of creative people were talking about at the beginning of the pandemic having a really hard time. And I think editors fell in that. Like I had some projects that I really should have been editing in March and April. And I just had such a difficult time doing that because it requires a part of our brain that I feel like I didn't have access to at that time.
Yep.
Like, too much of my brain was taken up with too many other worries. And I mean, that's still true. I have not shaken it completely, but I, like you, I think pulled it back together a little in May. So yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Glad.
Onward.
Yes, for sure. Just if anybody who's here in the room has questions for us, you should definitely type those into the chat. Just hover along the bottom, and there's a little speech bubble that says chat, and you can type something in, because we're going to take questions in a couple of minutes, and we are happy to answer anything. Tami and I are pretty wide open people. Is there anything else that I want to ask you before we go to the chat? Because there's not questions there yet. So let's see. Oh, you know what? Let's talk about the covers for a second. Do you want to show the books one more time for people who weren't here?
So these covers are my favorite, and I'm going to tell you why. I have such a personal connection to both the covers and like the process of selecting who got to do the cover. So starting with like Vanessa, the reason why I love this cover, you know, this was my entry into the world of publishing, and I am a strong believer in fate. I wrote a story about a 13-year-old girl named Vanessa from Newark, right? So, and she idolizes Vanessa Williams, the first Black woman to win Miss America. And well, wouldn't it be great if I could get Vanessa Brantley Newton to do the cover? Why? Because Vanessa is just legend, and Vanessa herself is from Newark, like me. So it just felt like such a full circle moment. The way that happened was I was at a conference for the New Jersey SCBWI June conference, and I think I was just there like as a student, and I remember messaging you and saying, oh my God, I met Vanessa Brantley Newton, and you were like, girl, you better ask her if she would do the cover. And I'm like, I was so shy and so scared to ask her, but when I pitched it to her, she was like, a 13-year-old singer from Newark and her name is Vanessa? She was like, send me the first few pages of the manuscript. And when she read it, she was like, I'm in. Have your people call my people.
And the most amazing thing is that when you texted me from that conference, my art director and I had just had a conversation about who might do the cover of this book, and Vanessa Brantley Newton was like at the top of our list. So when you texted me, I would never have said to you, oh, go talk to her, if I hadn't already talked to my art director. But it was like the same week. It was total fate.
It was fate, stars aligned. So I'm really thankful. I think she captured Newark perfectly. She captured Vanessa perfectly. You know, I wanted to show a beautiful, full-figured African-American teenager, because we don't see enough of that on book covers. So I think Vanessa did a beautiful job with the cover. Now, the cover for Becoming Beatriz. Now, Beatriz is Puerto Rican, what some would consider Afro-Latinx or Afro-Latina. So what was special about this cover was that we actually had a Latina artist to do this cover, Alyssa Bermudez, right? Yep. So that was also like a really special connection for me. Now, Alyssa is not from Newark, but like I think that she really captured, you know, Newark so nicely in this picture. And I love the motif of the wishmaker flower because it appears in the text all throughout the book, and I just think that Alyssa did a beautiful job with it.
Yeah, Alyssa lives in New York City,
Yeah.
or did. I think she's somewhere else now, but she lived in New York City, and she identifies as Nuyorican because her family roots are from Puerto Rico. Yep. Yeah. And I feel like if you're from New York, you've definitely been to Newark at least, and you're aware of Newark and its whole, you know, jive. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole vibe there. So
yeah.
So yeah, those covers just mean a lot to me, and I think they, even though two different artists did the covers, they speak to each other so beautifully. So
yeah, me too. I think that was the other thing, is we wanted them to feel like companions, and especially creating companions where one is middle grade and one is YA. We wanted there to be a similar enough look to the books that when you looked at them together, that they made sense. Yeah, and I think the silhouette is really what pulls the two together, that you don't see. And also, I love the idea of a silhouette too, because it lets the reader really use your words and your description of the character to form their own idea of what the person looks like, as opposed to telling the reader by putting a photo realism or something like that on the cover. So yeah.
And the way I read, I would usually, when I see a silhouette, when I'm reading a book, somehow I just slip myself into that silhouette.
Ah, cool.
Like, oh, okay, that's me. And it doesn't matter what race the character is or the background. I'll always find one little nugget that I can identify with. And the second I find it, I'm like, oh, the person on the cover is me, of course.
That's awesome. I love that. And I think you write your books that way, where you invite readers to see themselves and your characters. And I think that's really important. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we still don't have any questions in the chat. So does anyone have questions? Because we have time to answer them if you want to type them in there. Or there's really not a ton of people in this room, so you could potentially unmute yourself and make your video alive and ask us a question. Just make sure it's a question rather than a comment if we're going to unmute. But let us know if anyone has anything. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic event. I know that you have different chats to go to all day, and I hope you're hearing from some really great authors and different folks. And Donna has put in the chat, Donna from Charlesbridge from marketing, has said that you can download galleys of both Like Vanessa and Becoming Beatriz, along with discussion guides too, and those are all available in the Charlesbridge booth. So you can definitely go take advantage of that, for sure. And also, I think right now that one of the things that I've been really happy about that's been a result, Tami, of what you were talking about after George Floyd's murder and what has happened in the aftermath, I think one of the silver linings of that is that people have really been buying books by Black authors and about Black characters. And so that's the other thing, is that folks could recommend the books to people to give them to kids. And for me, like, I in particular have been buying books with Black characters to give to white kids in my life, so that white kids are getting more books in their home that have Black characters in them.
Yeah, that's the ticket right there. Yeah. Is when you're buying a book, if you see a Black character or a brown character, the question shouldn't be, who should I give this to? ... meaning like, what Black or brown person in my life should I give this to? No, it shouldn't be that. Let's just normalize giving books with kids of color to anyone, right? Because growing up, you know, I have to admit, growing up, I really didn't read books featuring kids of color.
Yeah, me neither. I don't think there were a lot of them around.
And I actually looked this up. In 1986, of the 3,000 books that were published, 18 were by Black authors. So of course, right, those 18 books featured Black characters. I mean, 18 out of 3,000, that is like 0.0006% or something like that. So that was my reality. So I read a lot of Anastasia Krupnik and Ramona Quimby, and I love those stories, don't get me wrong. But for as much as those books were normalized in my reading life, we need to return that and do the same thing for books featuring diverse characters. Let's normalize these books into all kids' lives.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially for white kids who have all white family and go and live in places where they're mostly going to encounter white kids at school. And I think that's who I usually am the most careful about giving books to, that have Black characters in them. And I do it at baby showers, and I do it at first birthdays, and all of my friends and family are like, here comes Karen with her diverse books. And like, you better believe it. Right?
Yeah, no, you get snaps for that. That's how it should be, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we have 2 comments in here. So one person says that I love that Tammy's new book for loved ones is dedicated to your son, Christopher, All Because You Matter. And someone else is saying, as a Black woman, I don't think I read any Black writers until college, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And you know, that was true for me. I did not read anything written by a person of color until I got to college. And other people have questioned me on that. They're like, but Karen, you took honors English in high school. You went to a good high school. I'm like, yeah, I went to a good high school run by white people who did not assign me any writers of color.
Control. Yeah, you yourself, as a teenager and young person, you didn't have control over what was given you in school. Same here, right?
Yep.
So I didn't, if there were books that existed like that, I didn't know about them because they weren't really like given to me in school. It wasn't really taught in school. But thankfully, by the time I became a teacher and I started to like read stories and write stories with my kids, I started to notice, I was like, ooh, Jacqueline Woodson, who's that?
Yeah, and then you could introduce that to your classroom.
Yeah, I'm like, Meg Medina. Ooh, where was this when I was a kid? So
yeah, that's great. Okay, so Robin Coleman asks, Tammy, what's the biggest takeaway you want youth to get from your books?
Oh man, do you have to pick just one?
No, but no.
So I think one of the things that I want kids to take away from my books is that, like, we all are human. We're all people. You know, when you see a book like Vanessa, if you are a white kid from the suburbs, I want you to still read it, because I guarantee you there's something in there you might identify with. A 13-year-old girl who's struggling with her sense of self in 1983 Newark, I believe those could be the same issues that a 13-year-old kid from White Picket Fenceville, you know, in any town USA could be going through right now in 2020. You know, a lot of these are the things that connect us as humans. So my hope would be that kids would look beyond, you know, the surface of what a character looks like and go deep and really try to find the root of what makes us similar in so many different ways. So I think that would be my biggest takeaway. And as far as becoming Beatriz, writing it, that really, the takeaway there is, it's okay to make mistakes. We're all human. Everybody's going to do something, you know, off kilter at some point in their lives, you know. And sometimes when you mess up, or sometimes when you fall, I think I have a quote somewhere in one of these books where I say, sometimes life pulls us back to launch us into something beautiful. And so that's another big takeaway that I would like kids to really internalize. Like, don't beat yourself up if you make a mistake. You always have a chance to become better.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's great. I love that answer.
Yay. I think it's true for adults too, though, right? Like,
totally.
We get a second chance.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something that a lot of people get stuck on, right? That they feel like if they make a misstep or a bad decision, or something that they thought was a good decision that ends up having bad ramifications, or whatever it might be, that they think like, oh no, that's it, like I'm done. And I think, and also I think that's one of the things I worry about with young people, is that I don't know if we're giving young people enough of a chance to fail anymore as much as we should, because so much can be learned from failure. And I also think it's one of the things that's been weird during the pandemic, right? That like some people are very quick to be like, science was wrong, they don't know what they're doing, when really we learn as we go, and we figure out things as we go. And I think that's what Vanessa and Beatriz both see in their lives, is that they both have to make decisions in the moment. They both have to do things that they're not exactly sure about, but the notion that they can back up and course correct, I think, is really important.
Yeah, there's beauty in the mess ups.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that's one of the that's the other thing I loved about Beatriz and Vanessa both is that the flowers and what they signify. So Vanessa's got sunflowers in her life that aren't real, right? And she's really wishing for sunflowers that were real.
Yeah.
And then Beatriz has the wishmaker flowers, the dandelion fluff flowers that are growing out of the deserted lot or out of the cement, really.
Yeah.
And sort of what the hope that can come from flowers and the idea of finding something beautiful everywhere you are.
Yeah. And I love flowers. I don't think I take care of them very well. But I have to say, one of the benefits of this quarantine pandemic life has been that this is the first year that my flowers actually thrived. Because I'm here.
Nice. Because you're
here and I'm watering them like clockwork every morning. You know, when you're dealing with the hustle and bustle of everyday life, I mean, there were some days where I would forget to water them. So my flowers are doing great this year.
That's awesome. Okay, we have another question. So, Robin said she recently finished reading Wonder and the companion to that, which is Julian. And that same message that you just said about the takeaway, that really struck her there as well.
I loved that book.
Yeah.
Wonder. I didn't realize there was a companion though.
Oh, there's several, I think, actually. Because
a novel? Julian? The
there's
novel?
Julian, but then isn't, other people in this room are going to know this better than me. Isn't there one written from the girls? Yeah, there's 3. Robin says there's 3. Yeah.
I got to get on it. See, here's the problem. It's like, in order for me to write, I obviously have to read a lot. But then sometimes when I'm in like deep revisions on something, then my reading life suffers.
Yeah.
So, but I did read a lot for the first 2 months of the pandemic because I wasn't writing. So yeah, it gets tough, but I'm going to have to add that. Oh, Pluto and Shingling. Okay.
Yeah, so there's 3. So there's Wonder and then there's those 3 other ones. Yeah.
Okay, I have to check that out. Thanks for the recommendation.
So it's 10 minutes of 1. We still do have a little bit of time. If anyone else has any other questions at all about anything, about our process of making the books, about Tami's writing, about anything about editing that you want to know about. Anyone got anything else?
Well, while we're waiting, I just want to congratulate you on your newest, was that a picture book deal that was in Publishers Weekly?
Oh, yes.
Native American?
It's called Keep a Munich.
Yes. So I want to congratulate you, and I just want to say like a huge right on to Charles Bridge in general for your Native American content. Like, thank you, because again, this stuff didn't exist when I was growing up. And it's been so special for me to put those kind of books in my son's hands, right? So he has We Are Grateful.
That's great. That's great.
You know, so we've bought her other work too. So Tracy Sorrell, I should put that out there. So yeah, it's great to see like more content, you know, by Native authors featuring Native characters. Like that's
Thank
cool.
you. Thank you for that. Yeah, the Keep a Numa book is not a Tracy Sorrell book. So that one is by
4 people or something.
By 3 authors and
crew.
I know, right? It's three authors and 1 illustrator, and everyone is Native, all from different tribes. And one of the authors is Wampanoag, and she's from the tribe that actually did help the Pilgrims survive that first winter. And the tribe that actually did share that meal with the Pilgrims. So this is told from the perspective of the Wampanoag, and actually from the perspective of Liachaman, which is the Wampanoag, the Wampanoag word for corn. And the wise corn is the one who helps the animals and the plants decide whether to help the Pilgrims or not. So that's what the story is about. And then you make sure that that Sebas, your son, Christopher is his first name, but Sebastian is how you call him. Make sure that you get him the companion book for We Are Grateful, Ojali Haliga, which comes out in the spring. That's called We Are Still Here. Every Native American Truths Everyone Should Know. And that book is for older kids. So Sebas is the exact right age for that book. It's for 7 to 10-year-olds. Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, we need more of that. So just keep it going.
Yeah, thank you for the shout out for that. I have At the moment, Charles Bridge has 6 more Native books coming in the next 3 to 4 years. So we're really excited about that.
There can never be enough. And in fact, I actually emailed Tracy Sorrell this week about a Native American person that I think she needs to write a picture book about.
Oh, nice.
So maybe you'll be seeing that. I don't know. I hope she goes for it.
That's great. Okay, so 2 people, Hyacinth says, it's great to have additional writing by Native Americans, as many of the books in the libraries mainly cover the Pilgrims for Thanksgiving. Of course, right. That's one of the reasons we really think this book should have come out ages ago. And then Kat says, I was very emotional when my library acquired Cynthia Leidick-Smith's latest book. It was my first time seeing my grandmother's language in a YA book. That's awesome, Kat. I'm so glad you were able to see that. And I imagine all the kids that will get to see it too. And Tracy, that's one of the things Tracy really is important for her, is to get Cherokee words into books and get and the syllabary, and and the Keep a New Book that we're doing has some Wampanoag words in it as well. So yeah.
Awesome.
And also that's important in Beatriz with getting all that Spanish and the Haitian in there too. And you know, those, and remember the conversation you and I had about how we were not going to italicize all of that, because the rules of publishing say that when a book is written in English, if there's a foreign word in the text, it should be italicized. But we decided not to do that because it's the main character's language. It's her Spanish. So why are we setting it off from the English in a way that draws attention to it? So we decided no italicizing of it.
Yeah. And it's okay if you have to look up a few things. I try to write, you know, the other languages in context as best as I could, but why not? You know, you can go the extra mile and pull up SpanishDict.com or Google Translate, learn something new, open up your world. So yeah.
I totally agree with that. And I think a lot of times in context, kids can figure out what something might mean. But also, as we know, they have resources in the internet, and there's all kinds of places that you can look up what translation is, which is so different from when we were kids. So yeah,
we didn't have that growing up. So but now in today's world, with all this technology and apps and everything, like, kids can certainly figure it out if they can't get it from the context. But I think I'm committing myself to always, you know, weave in some Spanish or some Creole into what I write. I don't think I can escape that. So.
Yeah, no, and you did. I think it's great. And I think also the way that you use some select AAVE in your work as well is important.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are multi-dialectical.
Yes. And you know, so before we end, I definitely too want to, because you gave such a lovely shout out to Charles Bridge, and I want to give a shout out to you too, is so folks know what else you've had out. So you've had out Freedom Soup's been out for a while. And so has Fearless Mary, both of those, which is awesome. And then All Because You Matter comes out when? In September or October?
October 6th, I think.
Great. And then you have a novel that you're working on too. Does that have a pub date yet?
Yes, February 2nd.
Okay.
Next year. It's called Muted.
Yeah, so that's coming too. That's great. And then are you also subbing stuff too right now? Did you have stuff out on submission?
I don't have anything new.
You'll get there eventually.
I miss writing. I miss it. And you know, with all of this uncertainty as far as how school is going to be, you know, I've kind of made up my mind that I'm going to keep Sebas home, at least at least for the first couple months, you know, and every family can make their own decision. And more power to you with whatever decision you need to make. But for my family, because I work from home, I can keep them home. But I think I need to come up with a way for how am I going to homeschool him and try to write a new novel. I'm dying to write a new novel. So hopefully I can find some kind of balance soon.
Good. Yeah. And you and I made a little brainstormed list, like, I don't know, 2 years ago.
I know.
Of like all kinds of like little topics and characters and things. Yeah, I'd love to go back and find that somewhere.
It's in my email.
There you go. You have it.
It's in my email. I remember.
Yeah.
seeing
Good.
that, the back and forth of it. But yeah, hopefully, you know, I can get over this hump and transition from little, I just have like little poems, little haikus and stuff. I'm ready to like dive into story
That's
now.
great. That's great. Good, good, good. Well, and maybe it'll be when Sebas is back to studying stuff, then you'll sort of make the transition easier too.
Yeah, he is always, he's like lurking back there. He's always around. He's an only child. So, you know, I'm his mom and his sibling.
Right, there you go. So we're going to wrap up. If there's no last questions from anyone, if anyone has anything else, just type away real quick. We've got about 2 more minutes. But otherwise, we're going to wrap up. And I always love talking to you, Tami, and we don't get to do it often enough. So this was a real treat.
Yes. Human contact. I missed it so much. We've had some fun dinners and stuff. So
yeah,
maybe next year.
I know, right? We keep saying maybe next year.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, so we've got to thank you. So thank you to everybody, too, for sticking with us and listening to some information about these 2 books and us working together.
I'm sure one more time.
Yeah, there you go, one more time. And remember that you can go download those in our booth, in the Charles Bridge booth. And there's activity guides there, too, discussion guides. There's discussion guides there, too, if you were to do the book with a group of students or whoever else. And we hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, whatever other sessions you're headed to as well, and enjoy. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.